and welcome to today's live history broadcast. Live broadcast in which I tend to put current events into a historical perspective, and as this is a live broadcast, as always, please keep the language clean. Now, if you have any difficulty in hearing me, please write it down, because if there's wind, I don't always feel it. I am, however, wearing a microphone here, and I can bring it up to my mouth if it is at all necessary. In today's video, I want to discuss once more the situation of mobilization in Russia, and above all, the fate of the recruits. And this is looking at what's happened in the past. If somebody gets recruited today, I don't know what will happen to them, but based on past experience, I think we can make a reasonably good guess. One thing I saw from people I know in Moscow was the following: that at the bottom of their apartment blocks, so people live in these big apartment blocks, there's stairwells, and there's 2 or 4 apartments on each side, on each landing, on each stairwell, and that goes up. And at the bottom, there's an exit. And there have been cases now where there is a policeman together with what is possibly a recruitment person or something, doing controls of young men there and then, and handing them their papers so they are recruited into the army. Furthermore, men have been caught in the metro, or coming out of the metro, in Moscow and in Petersburg, and in shopping centres even. There have been cases now which have been filmed of people being given their papers. Now, they're not actually being carted off to go into the army. Hello, Christopher. At this very moment, but once they've got their papers, they're in a very difficult situation as to actually get out of the situation they find themselves in. Even last week, there was a case in Moscow where a homeless shelter was raided. They actually, in this case, they did take away everybody under the age of 50. You may say that what is the point in taking away homeless people? It doesn't make any sense, but I suppose if you think from the point of view that nobody's going to miss them, then that might be the logic to this. I would have thought that if the person had been out facing the elements, well, it might have toughened them up for the winter, but a person in that condition isn't going to be of a great deal of use in the military situation. I would have thought. Maybe I am wrong on that one, but it's the cynicism of taking people who nobody will miss that really bothers me. Now, another things we've seen as well, we've already now seen the first people who have been mobilized have been taken prisoner. There is a video widely circulated on the internet where people were in the what appeared to be either they were already in Ukraine, they were in Lugansk Oblast, and they had said that they'd had 1 day of training and they fired 3 rounds each on this 1 day of training. Now, if it's 1 day of a refresher course for somebody who has been 5 years in the army, even that is hard to believe. But I mean, if somebody did their training 10 years ago and then given 1 day update, that makes it even worse. But there's something else which really bothers me more, and I'm going to see this in a historical aspect right now. Now we hear these stories how Russians are being expected to buy their own sleeping bags and their own body armor. Now, in February, or end of February, March, April, here in, not just in Poland where I am right now, but in Western Europe in general, there was a problem finding body armor. Every bit of body armor, it seems, had been actually picked up. I tried to locate both body armor and helmets here in Poland, in Germany, and in the UK, and there was nothing available when I tried to do it. So what's the situation going to be like in Russia right now? Well, I don't know, obviously, but I suspect that Russian parents trying to look for body armor to kit their kids out with is going to be rather tough. But let's supposing they do. They've got the cash and to get all this sort of stuff. Thing is this though, if they've got the cash to kit out their kids, then they might have the cash to actually buy them out of the army. I don't mean buy them out as in legally leaving the army. I mean buy them out to use a bribe to either get them out that way or to pay for a university course. Now, there was a case last week of a private school which issued university certificates. So got people in the university, and the certificates were costing 180,000 rubles each. So it's a fair, it's about 20,000 euros. And they'd issued quite a large number of them. Well, you might think 20,000, that's a huge amount of cash for somebody in Russia. I've got a comment. It says Russian soldiers get body armor for free from state. Russian mod post videos of soldiers receive military kits, etc. Okay then, well I'll tell you what then. If anybody claims that they're getting it for free and they've got it available, why doesn't the person making the comment just give their name and address, and I can then refer any Russians that I hear of who haven't been issued with body armor to the person who claims that they are actually getting it for nothing. And then you can sort it out between the two of you directly. I'm just repeating what I have got, not from the Russian attack ministry, to call it the defense ministry is a bit of a joke, but or the military ministry, but from people actually on the ground in Russia. So, but anyway, so we did in previous conflicts. I mean, I have in the past compared this to the situation in Vietnam in the 1960s, where young Americans who had the possibility of getting out of it through going to university or something like Trump's well-known case of his bone spurs, which went from one foot to the other, and you could get out of it by doing something like this, and which is to a certain extent understandable. That also, we see the same thing in Russia today. If you're wealthy, if you're a member of the establishment elite, you don't go into battle. The people who go into battle are poor, and the people who are from ethnic minorities. There's absolutely no way that somebody could afford to get, for example, 180,000 euros to get a false university certificate. Having said that, the authorities have actually found out of these false university certificates. If they hadn't have found out about it, I wouldn't have known about it. So that is the way it works. But now, let's just assume, for the point of argument, that they do actually get all of this kit which they put together. There is one very serious problem in the Russian army, which is called Dedovshchina. This is hazing, bullying of new recruits. The word Ded in Russian means grandfather. Shchina means the rules, the law, the unofficial law. Dedov, it's a genitive, so it means the grandfather's rules. So grandfather's rules, and this indicates that anybody who joins the army can be bullied. Now, whereas bullying does exist in every army in the world, I don't have any doubt on that. But the problem with the Russian army is that it's particularly brutal. And we have figures from, for example, 2007 is the last one I could find. I think it was 296 people died as a result. Now, the Russian military ministry claimed it was 16 people actually were murdered and the rest all committed suicide. But to have one person a day almost dead is pretty horrific, and this type of bullying often makes no sense at all. In 1987, there was a case which became quite famous in Lithuania because there was a Lithuanian, obviously Lithuania was still occupied by the Kremlin in those days, who there was some soldier who attempted to rape him as part of this system, and he'd actually shot them and the others who'd been, but he shot 8 people as a result of that. Now that soldier, who would now be in his 50s, now I have no idea where he is, but the case became quite famous because it went to court several times. In fact, he was actually arrested and he was probably injected with drugs to make him appear mentally unstable or something like that, rather than to give evidence about what had happened to him, and which effectively he'd used he shot them, I suppose, to be fair to say, in self-defense, without going through the entire story, because they had actually left him alone afterwards and he went and picked up the weapons and shot the rapists and the others whilst they were playing cards. Anyway, that is an extreme example of what can happen, but what would bother me in the current circumstances is that you've got this mass mobilization of people who are not prepared. People are frightened, so they go out and buy the kit, and that kit ends up getting stolen within this Dedovshchina system, and that, I fear, is a problem. Now, the problem with this type of thing is, once more, they will look for people who seem to be weaker or mentally weaker, people who don't want to be there, weaker in their way of thinking, or they pick on somebody who was an ethnic minority, or indeed if everybody was some Siberian and had a Russian in their hands, ethnic Russian, they'd probably pick on the ethnic Russian. So, but as we have seen, the victims of this war, the people who are being forcibly recruited, do come from the ethnic minorities above all, and this in itself is likely to end up in more pressure on the Russians. Sorry, here we have, I know a recruiter, I'm quoting here from Emir, I know a recruiter from Serbia, he trains Russian soldiers, he said no soldiers under his command can drink alcohol or will be kicked out, I think, and mobilized, receive basic and specific training. Okay, so we have a case here of somebody who's training Russian soldiers, so I presume he's a mercenary who's training Russians, and if that's the case in his case, okay, well that seems rare enough. I mean, obviously, if they're saying they can't actually drink alcohol, I think people manufacturing alcohol happens in all armies. It actually didn't happen. I never heard of it happening in the British Army, but I'm sure it does happen. I wouldn't. But one of the things we have heard, for example, I remember in the 80s these cases where Soviet soldiers, I should say, would actually drink things like antifreeze. There was no antifreeze for aircraft and things like that. Or in Afghanistan, Afghanistan drugs, including alcohol, and use of things like antifreeze and what have you, was a major problem. So So I really do feel for these 300,000 Russians who might end up in Ukraine fighting a war which at the very best they can hope for is to come out of it in the same condition as they went into it. That is the best possible outcome they can have. And a war, of course, where those who are part of the system are not actually touched by it, which to me is one of the particularly horrible things about this. Those who benefit from it are making no contribution towards it. If they only took the conscripts from those who wanted this war, I think there'd be one thing. But as we saw in the case of, for example, Dmitry Peskov's son, he didn't have to fight because his father was or is a member of the inner circle around the dictator Putin. So anyway, so that's how I currently see the situation, and if anybody's got any comments about this, and the case I mentioned earlier about the Lithuanian, I thought that might actually make an interesting video, because this is quite well known in Lithuania, but it's not, I've never heard of it actually mentioned elsewhere. And I would say that, in my opinion, the rapists got what they deserved. They were shot, and those who allowed this to happen should also have been punished, but they weren't. They're possibly still in the Russian army today, possibly, I don't know. I mean, they'd be well into their 60s by now. Anyway, thanks for listening, and all the best from me in Poland.